Tired of seeing my horses in the pasture, Karen opened the doors of my stable so that the animals could be free. But she didn't realize that the first one out was Zeus, my bull weighing over 1,500 pounds, who ran straight at her. If there's one thing I've learned living in this small town, it's that there will always be someone who goes where they don't belong. But some people go beyond any limits of intrusion and make you wonder how they're still alive without constant supervision. This woman was exactly like that. Not only did she think she knew more than everyone else, but she made a point of rubbing it in other people's faces. It didn't matter what the subject was. If someone was talking about gardening, she knew all about plants. If the subject was construction, she was there to give her opinion on foundations and roofs. Now, when it came to animals, she became unbearable. Well, I have a property with horses, a few other animals, and Zeus, my 1,500-pound bull. And I'd lost count of how many times this woman came to lecture me about how keeping animals locked up was a crime against nature, or that all living things should be free. The first time, I tried to be polite. The second time, I ignored her. The third time, I realized that politeness and patience were useless with these types of people. But even so, I never thought she would have the courage to do what she did. It was a quiet afternoon. I'd gone out to sort some things out in town and wouldn't be back until nightfall. My horses were in the stable, resting and enjoying the shade, as it was so hot that day. Then this woman had the stupidest idea of her life. She opened the stables. Not content with giving idiotic advice, she decided to act. She decided that she was going to free my horses, as if she were doing some kind of sacred mission for animal welfare. The problem was that in the middle of the horses was Zeus, my bull, my 1,500-pound bull, the grumpiest animal on the property, the kind of animal that, if you don't know him, you shouldn't even look him in the eye, let alone let out of the stable. And it was exactly him who got out first. I wasn't there to see the exact moment, but witnesses say it was a scene worthy of a movie. As soon as the gate opened, Zeus took off like a rocket. He wasn't the type to take advantage of his freedom to go skipping happily across the fields. He wanted to destroy the first thing he saw. And the first thing he saw? The woman who opened the damn gate. They say that when the survival instinct kicks in, the body reacts before the mind. But apparently, this woman had no such instinct. Instead of running away, she opened her arms and tried to calm Zeus down. She tried to calm a 1,500-pound bull, as if she were dealing with a puppy in the park. And then, well, Zeus didn't like the approach. With impressive speed for an animal of his size, he shot towards her. The woman must have realized too late that she was in trouble, because witnesses say that her face changed from "I'm an animal advocate" to "I've made a huge mistake" in a matter of seconds. She finally tried to run, but it was too late. The impact was so strong that she flew. Yes, she flew. They say her body went up at least 2 meters before hitting the ground with a noise that made everyone nearby cringe. And Zeus? Well, Zeus gave a satisfied moo, turned his back, and went off to graze as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, the woman lay on the ground, completely immobilized. And the most ironic thing, she so wanted the animals to be free, but ended up strapped to a stretcher in the ambulance. The scene was a spectacle, something that, if it had been filmed, would have become one of those viral videos that people watch over and over again, disbelieving the level of idiocy that led to the disaster. Because, you see, who in their right mind opens a stable without knowing how to deal with animals? The problem with some people isn't ignorance. It's the conviction that they know more than everyone else. This woman, for example, was absolutely certain that she was doing the world a huge amount of good by opening those doors, as if the horses were in there suffering, hoping for someone enlightened enough to rescue them. In her mind, I was some kind of cruel villain who enslaved the poor animals, preventing them from running free in the countryside like in the premium feed commercials. But then came Zeus, with his 1,500 pounds of pure strength and fury, and put an end to this delirium. The crowd witnessing the scene was paralyzed for a few seconds. No one knew whether to laugh, run, or call for help. The impact had been so brutal that the woman didn't even seem to understand what had happened to her own body. All she knew was that, a second before, she was standing up, and, the next second, she was on the ground, staring at the sky, not feeling half her body. And Zeus? Oh, Zeus didn't even bother to look back. He had done what he had to do and was now satisfied. He walked calmly to a corner of the pasture, as if nothing had happened. It wasn't until one of the neighbors shouted that everyone started to move. Some ran to the woman, others went to call an ambulance, and one or two unsuspecting people tried to approach Zeus, but gave up as soon as he raised his head and gave them that "try it and I'll shoot you too" look. Meanwhile, I was still in town, with no idea that my property had become a battleground between human stupidity and the natural laws of physics. I only found out when I received a phone call from one of the neighbors telling me quite bluntly, "Your bull ran over that woman from the association." I blinked a few times, trying to process the information. What? She came into your stable and let the animals loose. Zeus didn't like it. My first reaction was to let out a long sigh, not of concern, but of sheer exhaustion, because deep down, I knew it would happen sooner or later. Ever since this woman started with her crazy theories about how I should reconsider my oppressive lifestyle against animals, it was only a matter of time before she took her own idiocy too far. I got in the car and drove back as fast as I could, already imagining the size of the mess. I arrived at the property and saw the scene from afar. An ambulance parked, paramedics surrounding the woman, a group of neighbors whispering on one side, and the sheriff with his arms crossed, shaking his head like he was tired of this kind of thing. I got out of the car and went straight to him. What the hell happened here? He looked at me with the expression of someone holding back laughter. Your neighbor decided to play animal rights advocate and let her horses loose. Only Zeus was the first to leave. I looked over to where Zeus was standing. The big man seemed completely at peace, chewing on the grass, completely unaware that he had just rewritten that woman's story forever. And how is she? The sheriff sighed and pointed to the paramedics, who were trying to get the woman onto the stretcher. Her face was a mixture of pain, indignation, and humiliation. It looked like she wanted to scream, but I knew that any words that came out of her mouth at that moment would only make the situation worse. I stood there watching as they put her into the ambulance. That's when I noticed the wheelchair folded up next to the stretcher. I turned to the sheriff. "That there?" he confirmed with a nod. "He broke his hip. He's going to spend a long time without walking. I should feel sorry. I should." But all I could do was think about how many times this woman had tormented me with her hypocritical speeches, trying to teach me how to look after my own property. And in the end, it wasn't the animals who needed help. It was her. The ambulance left with its siren on, but what no one could ignore was the fact that this woman had been run over by her own ego. Yes, Zeus was the force of nature that brought her down, but in the end, it was her arrogance that set her off on the wrong path, literally. I stood there while the neighbors whispered, exchanged glances, and tried to decide which reaction was the most appropriate. Some were genuinely concerned, others held back laughter, and a few tried to maintain a serious expression, but failed miserably. It was hard to feel sorry for someone who had spent the last few months making everyone hell with pointless rules and constant meddling. The sheriff was still by my side, shaking his head as if he already knew that one day this was going to happen. "I ought to take you to task for keeping a bull like that around here," he said, in a tone that didn't hide its irony. I looked at Zeus, who continued his routine of peaceful living, ruminating as if he hadn't just sent a woman off for a long period of physiotherapy. "He didn't do anything wrong," I shrugged. "The cattle were in the stable, in the right place. She was the one who went there to play animal hero." The sheriff let out a long sigh. "And that's why she can't sue you. Now, That was interesting information. Can't she? He pointed to the stable with the gates still open. You didn't ask her to come in here. She trespassed on your property, let your animals loose, and got run over in the process. That means that if anyone is accused of anything here, it's her. I didn't even try to hold back the smile. So, technically, I can file a lawsuit against her? The sheriff looked at me sideways and snorted a laugh. If she wants to, she can. But I think she's learned her lesson. I didn't doubt that she had, but that didn't mean she was going to admit it. In the days that followed, the whole town heard about the incident. It was the main topic of the week, the kind of gossip that travels faster than important news. Versions of the story varied from person to person. Some exaggerated, saying that Zeus threw the woman 3 meters into the air. Others said that she tried to ride the bull before being thrown to the ground. One of the best versions said that she raised her fist to Zeus and tried to look him in the eye. The point was that no one was on her side. That's because the more details that emerged, the more people realized the absurdity of the situation. She invaded my property. She let my animals loose. She was run over by a bull. And now she was in a wheelchair, probably wondering where it went wrong. The answer? From the beginning. But the funniest thing came later. A week after the accident, I received a letter. Official, with a serious letterhead. It was from the neighborhood association. The document basically said that my property posed a danger to the neighborhood, and that large animals should be removed. I looked at the letter. Then I looked at the sheriff, who was visiting me that day. Do you see this? He took the paper and read it for a few seconds. Then he snorted. Oh, no. That's right. It was obvious. Even screwed up, even in a wheelchair, that woman was still trying to boss around what wasn't hers. I crossed my arms. Well, since you want to talk about danger, maybe I should remind the association that there are security cameras recording her trespassing on my property. The sheriff smiled. I'll be sure to hand over the footage myself. If this woman thought she was going to get out of this so easily, she was sorely mistaken. When I read that letter from the neighborhood association trying to make it my fault, I realized that some people just don't learn. Even after being run over by a 1,500-pound bull, being stuck in a wheelchair, and becoming the biggest joke in town, that woman still thought she could call the shots. And not only that, she really believed it was my fault, as if Zeus had planned the attack on purpose, as if he had conspired to pick up momentum, calculated the trajectory of the impact, and decided that it was the perfect moment to end her race. If anything, in her mind, Zeus and I were accomplices in this crime. But that was fine. If she wanted war, I was ready to give it to her. I took the letter straight to the sheriff, who was expecting something like this. When I put the paper in front of him, he read it for a few seconds, sighed deeply, and rubbed his face as if he needed more patience than he was willing to offer that day. Let me get this straight, he began. She trespassed on your property, turned your horses loose, got run over by your bull, and now you want to take your animals away? Exactly. He shook his head in disbelief. I really thought this woman was going to drop the ball after all this. That's right. I crossed my arms. But it seems that even gravity couldn't get that idea into her head. The sheriff let out a short laugh before getting serious again. And what do you want to do? The right question. Because now I had an opportunity. Instead of simply ignoring it, I decided to play with the same weapons. I want to file a complaint against her for trespassing, and I'm also going to sue the association for harassment. The sheriff looked at me with a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. You know, I support that idea. And so began the final downfall of that woman. I handed over the recordings from the security cameras showing the exact moment she entered my stable and let the animals out. The images were crystal clear. You could see her satisfied smile as she opened the doors, as if she were committing a heroic act. And, of course, you could see Zeus coming out like a cannonball and throwing her away. It was practically cinematic art. With that material in hand, it didn't take long for the lawyers to dismantle any argument she might have had. She tried to appeal to the Residents' Association, as she always did, but even they began to want to get rid of her. Because, you see, after the incident, people started asking themselves, if she did this to the horses, what else has she done around here? And, as expected, the stories started pouring in. People who had already been fined for having too many colorful plants in the garden. Residents who had been forced to repaint their houses because the color wasn't sophisticated enough. People who have been threatened with absurd penalties for ridiculous things, like leaving the garbage can on the wrong side of the garage. That woman wasn't liked. She was feared. But now she was a joke. The verdict was wonderful. The trespass gave her a hefty fine, and the lawsuit against the association forced them to stop trying to remove my animals. But best of all, the woman was removed from her position at the association, and with public humiliation. They held an extraordinary meeting, packed with residents who were just waiting for the right moment to overthrow that neighborhood dictator. The interim president took the microphone and announced, without any ceremony, after analyzing the complaints and the evidence presented, Karen is no longer on the board of the neighborhood association. The silence lasted a second, and then people applauded. Applause, laughter, a festive atmosphere in the air. It was the end of the reign of the woman who tried to release my horses and ended up trapped by her own stupidity. And me? Well, I went back to my property, looked at Zeus, and slapped him on the back in thanks. He did more for the community in a single day than any neighborhood association meeting has done in years. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like and a comment.